Welcome to the debate. Today we are diving into one of the most stunning and complete reversals in championship sports history, the UFC 323 main event. Petr, a massive betting underdog, didn't just win the bantamweight title back from Merab to he authored a 25-minute masterwork.
It was genuinely shocking. I mean, we're talking about an athlete, Merab, who just completely dominated their first fight, a near shutout, and then gets utterly dismantled in the rematch.
And the stakes were just colossal. Merab was attempting a historic fourth title defense in a single calendar year. So that context, it really frames our entire discussion today. The core question for debate is this. Was this outcome primarily the result of Petr's technical genius and sophisticated, data-driven game plan, or was it the unavoidable consequence of Merab Dvalishvili being physically compromised by that incredibly grueling, historic schedule?
And I maintain that the unsustainable physical schedule Merab attempted was the primary unavoidable factor. He was, for lack of a better term, sacrificed to the demands of history, pushing his body well beyond its functional limit. I think the result was inevitable.
And I'll be arguing that, while we can't ignore the toll on Merab, the decisive factor was Jan's strategic adaptation. He executed a technical roadmap so precise, so far advanced from their first meeting, that it represented a true generational performance that would have beaten any version of Merab that night. My focus really rests on the sophisticated, strategic overhaul performed by Jan and his team. This wasn't just a physical win-aid. It was an intellectual superiority in execution. And crucially, Jan was finally uninjured, unlike in their first fight where that compromised right hand limited his power and his ability to use the essential right underhook.
I agree that being fully healthy certainly helped Jan, of course. But that doesn't really negate the fact that Merab was functioning at, well, a fraction of his normal capacity.
But let's look at the tactical changes. Jan's coach famously described their preparation as turning Jan into a, quote, human computer, developing a decision tree for every possible scenario. The proof is in the data on Dvalishvili's core strength, his relentless grappling. Jan defended an astounding 27 of 29 takedown attempts. That isn't luck, that isn't just fatigue. That is a strategic solution realized through perfect repetition.
And I see why you emphasize that takedown defense number. It is truly incredible. I want to frame the discussion, though, around the energy Merab brought into that cage. My argument is that Merab's loss was circumstantial. It was the consequence of fighting 4 top contender title defenses against Nurmagomedov, O'Malley, Sandhagen, and then Jan, all within a grueling 12-month period.
Athletes take those risks, though.
They do, but the cumulative physical cost is rarely accounted for until it shows up in a loss like this. Merab spent nearly 90 minutes in the octagon against the absolute elite of the division. 89 minutes and 42 seconds of total fight time. That requires 4 separate championship weight cuts, 4 full, brutal fight camps, and just virtually no meaningful recovery time. By the time he stepped in there against Jan, we saw an athlete who looked visibly sluggish, kind of flat, even in the opening rounds. It just dramatically diminished his signature freaky high output. Jan capitalized on technical weaknesses, yes. But those vulnerabilities were amplified by the systemic trauma on a body that's approaching 35 years old with zero chance to truly recover.
Okay, let's talk specifics about how Jan neutralized Merab, because this is where the genius of the game plan really shines. Merab's central weapon is not just pressure, but it's the combination of striking blitzes designed to disguise the entry for his takedowns, so Jan needed a simple, immediate, and high-volume disruptor.
And that's where you bring up the lead hand post.
Exactly. Jan introduced 2 specific tools, the dipping jab and, more importantly, the lead hand post. The post is simple. He's using his forward hand to maintain distance, placing a barrier on Merab's chest or shoulder as Merab tries to blitz forward. It forces Merab to either stop short or change his angle, which prevents him from getting clean lines for that penetration step takedown. It essentially controls the initiative, and this is why Jan was able to land his counterstrikes with such efficiency.
I agree that the post was effective. It certainly threw Merab off his timing in rounds 1 and 2. But I had to ask, how sustainable is that static technical adjustment against an uncompromised 100% version of Merab? Merab's pressure is designed not just to land strikes or takedowns, but to exhaust the opponent into making mistakes. If Merab was at his peak pace, relentless for 5 full rounds, would Jan have physically been able to sustain that constant hand-fighting and posture adjustment against a truly fresh opponent?
Well, Jan found a solution for relentless pressure by making that pressure ineffective at the point of entry. It's a very intelligent use of leverage and distance control. The fact that Jan was successful in implementing this high IQ strategy for 25 minutes proves his conditioning was superior and his strategy was viable, regardless of Merab's state. He didn't just survive the pressure, he actively disabled the pressure mechanism.
But the mechanism was already sputtering. If the speed of the machine has been reduced because of overuse, then the window for the human-computer calculations, it opens up considerably. We can't separate Jan's successful execution from Merab's decreased output. Jan's game plan was great, but its decisive outcome was only possible because Merab's baseline speed and stamina had been fundamentally degraded by his schedule.
You're attributing Jan's success solely to Merab slowing down. I see it as Jan leveling up to meet that pace and finding the critical technical flaw. So let's pivot from range control to damage, specifically Jan's systemic, targeted exploitation of Merab's body.
The liver shots, yes. A weakness O'Malley first exposed, but one Jan truly leveraged.
Right, and this wasn't general wear and tear. This was highly specific technical exploitation. Jan's team identified that when Merab throws or retracts that long right hand, he often flares his elbow or neglects his body entirely. Jan consistently drove powerful left body kicks and punches into the liver throughout rounds 3, 4, and 5. And witnesses, broadcast audio, they confirmed Merab yelped in pain multiple times. This level of repeatable precision, it suggests technical genius in finding and exploiting a persistent defensive gap, not just hitting a sore spot on a tired guy.
I concede the technical flaw is real and persistent, but the severity of the reaction in the rematch has to be viewed through the lens of Merab's physical trauma. We saw the wariness in his face, the visible cuts and bruises he accumulated early on. He was bleeding from the nose, checking his jaw. When a man is forced to endure 4 brutal camps and 4 championship cuts in 12 months, his ability to absorb punishment, especially to vulnerable areas like the liver, is just fundamentally compromised.
So is the argument then that Merab was so compromised he was physically unable to keep his elbow tucked regardless of coaching?
I would argue that fatigue degrades technical perfection. When you're exhausted, your muscle memory fails. That momentary defensive lapse, the flaring elbow, becomes a permanent vulnerability. Jan's power shots were successful because Merab's resilience was depleted. Jan delivered the finishing blow, sure, but the pace and the schedule were the pre-existing condition that left Merab open to the attack. It makes the victory less about Jan's inherent skill superiority and more about the timing of the engagement.
Okay, let's move to the third key area, the grappling parity. If Merab was simply physically depleted, Jan should have just been able to strike him without having to worry about wrestling. But Jan didn't just outstrike Merab, he won the grappling exchanges decisively. He secured 5 successful takedowns of his own compared to Merab's 2. This is critical as he was dominated on the ground in their first meeting.
The tables certainly turned on the scorecards. That much is undeniable.
This demonstrates genuine, quantifiable wrestling improvement. Jan executed key defensive techniques that were impossible in Fight 1 because of his injury, primarily using that right underhook to defend the shot. He also repeatedly used an intelligent technique, elbowing Merab's forearm to break the clinch bear grip. This was not passive defense against the tired opponent. This was active, skilled counter-wrestling. He was successful in every facet of MMA, including scrambling beautifully out of tough spots, like that thunderous slam in round 3.
I agree that the defensive elbow technique against the bear grip was a brilliant addition. And Merab was visibly struggling to maintain those tight grips, even rubbing his forearm after the first round. But why was Merab struggling to maintain that grip?
Because Jan's technique was perfect.
Or because Merab's control, his grip strength, his core endurance, all essential for that kind of pressure, were significantly compromised by his chronic exhaustion. Jan's TDD was excellent, but Merab's takedown accuracy of 37% on the night was abnormally low even for him. This suggests a diminished explosiveness in his entries and a lack of the functional strength needed to finish the shot or maintain position. It forced him to fight through a level of discomfort that no athlete should face in a title match.
Jan achieved parity against a fighter whose motor was running on a low battery, not against a fully charged champion.
We can certainly debate the percentage of Merab's tank, but the technical evidence points to Jan having the intellectual and physical refinement, now at full health, to deliver the blueprint. The lead hand post, the precise counter-striking, the systemic body attack, the improved counter-grappling, these were all calculated solutions that neutralize the core elements of Merab's game. The 49-46 scorecards reflect the dominance of Jan's strategic exploitation of a fighter who, even at 80%, is still elite.
Well, while Jan's performance was remarkable, and his adjustments were clearly effective, we just can't divorce the outcome from the historical context. Merab Philly's attempt to achieve an unprecedented defense record stripped the contest of a true measure of their skills at 100%. Jan's technical solutions were ultimately successful because they were applied against an opponent who was already diminished and compromised. We witnessed Jan's strategic genius shine, but it shone against a fractured version of Merab.
What we know for certain is that Jan proved he is one of the most complete and adaptable fighters in the sport. He found the definitive technical roadmap on how to defeat the machine by combining masterful striking with elite-level takedown defense and clutch counter-wrestling. For me, his strategic adaptation was the defining factor.
And we also know that in professional combat sports, the physical consequences of pushing the body past its limits through extreme activity, it often proves terminal for a title reign. The outcome was highly dependent on the circumstances surrounding the champion's body, not just the opponent's strategy.
The fact that this 1-1 rivalry featured such an extreme disparity in outcomes just guarantees the inevitable, a trilogy bout.
Right. And that third fight, hopefully with both men at peak physical condition, will finally be the definitive measure of which factor, Jan's profound technical masterclass or Merab's depletion, truly governed this unexpected and shocking result.